Welcome to our very first Next Conversation. I'm really excited to introduce this idea as we talk about a really important topic today, and that's the topic of anxiety. I think you'll all agree this is beyond prevalent in our society, in our families, in our lives. So it's going to be a great conversation. Our goal is to share from our experience. I'll introduce our guests here in just a moment, or they'll introduce themselves. But our goal is to share from our experience, and we have different experiences, just as any of you who are watching or those of you here in the room. But we also want to end every conversation with a question. So we will likely throw that question out and then conclude our recording, and then continue the conversation. For those in the room, we'll continue it here. For those who watch this or listen to it later, they can continue that conversation later. So I am Di. I am a pastor here at Venture Church, and again, super glad that you are joining us. We'll go right to you, Dakota.
My name is Dakota. I'm a young adult here at Venture Church. We explaining how?
Yeah, go ahead and give a little snapshot of your story.
Yeah, went to high school in this area. I got saved my senior year. Had no idea what anxiety was. Had no experience of it. I had friends that had it, but I was always kind of like the one, like, what is that? Why are you stressing? Why do you act a certain way? Come to it was at Canyon Creek at that point, but it's Venture. They had the school of ministry. I was one of the first classes there. Graduated there, went to Washington State, and then that's where I was introduced to anxiety.
My name is Daniel Carpenter. I'm one of the pastors here at Venture. I have the privilege of leading the Celebrate Recovery Ministry, where anxiety is a topic that we enable people to gain traction with in their relationship with themselves, others, and God. And I very much personally deal with anxiety. I get up weekly in front of people and I say, my name's Daniel, and I struggle with anxiety. And that is one of the very true things about my life.
I'm Hannah. I'm a therapist, and I'm what's known as a neuroscience-informed psychoeducator. And I say that because I have PTSD, and for many, many years, if you would have asked me what my anxiety was on a scale of 1 to 10, I would have said 27, and I would never have been able to sit up here, especially not knowing anyone. And for a lot of that time, I was a therapist, and I've also been a teacher. And so in pursuit of wondering why I can know something and not do it or feel it, I've just really learned how wonderfully wired we are, and when we can kind of separate our biology from ourself and our character, it just helps to own the story and to look a little deeper. And so that's kind of been my whole goal, to reduce shame, because that's kind of the infection that gets in and makes anxiety so much worse.
So, did you mention already what you do as your occupation?
Yeah, I'm a therapist and a neuroscience-informed psychoeducator. I do have a private practice where I treat people who have OCD, or what my team calls anxiety plus, which means it's complicated by something, maybe autism or traumatic brain injury or PTSD or something like that. And I'm a trainer, and I go around the country when there's not a pandemic and train other therapists about anxiety treatment.
So Hannah, since this is your realm of expertise, I'm going to direct this question just to you before we kind of start peppering in questions. But can you define for us, the word anxiety is everywhere. People use it on a low spectrum of, oh my goodness, this is making me so anxious, to like debilitating anxiety. So can you define for us anxiety so we have a working understanding and relationship with that word?
Yes, so many times, because the actual emotion of anxiety has the same word as the disorder of anxiety, there can be a lot of confusion. Anxiety itself is an emotion. Emotions, if you break them down into the smallest bits, are essentially a neurochemical signal system to let us know when there's a problem. If we take that anxiety to be us, though, that can be a problem, right? So we have to separate that out. Well, every person has anxiety. Everybody has that emotion, and it's there to warn us about things and tell us when there's problems and help us be alert, as opposed to fear, which makes us run away or fight. But anxiety, the disorder, is when maybe there's a chemical imbalance, or there's too much of the emotion, or it's not showing up enough, or something like that, where the emotion itself is either distorted or overblown or something like that. So there's kind of a difference between the emotion, and we don't want to ignore, push down, or squelch the emotion. And we want to understand that just because you have anxiety about standing up in front of talking, it does not mean you have a disorder or something like that, and that can kind of help to know.
I would love if you guys would be so vulnerable even to just share what your own experience struggling with anxiety has been like. So yeah, either of you.
Sure. So I've dealt with anxiety my whole life, but I didn't know it. I buried anxiety in drugs. And it was only after I dealt with that issue that I came to understand just how deeply anxiety affects me. And it does. There's an open door that if I open it in my head, it's like a flood just comes in and sweeps everything away. So there's a real space for the practice and the process of being me, because I can't take medications because they're all abusable and I'm just not okay with that in my life. Is learning not to open that door, and then the practical process of what to do with it once that door is open, how to talk about it, being able to expose that part of myself. And it's amazing just how much that grip loosens on my heart and my mind when I can just say it to another person. When I can just unload that, like, because I know I'm underwater with something, and that gasp of air comes into my lungs spiritually when I can admit that and share that with someone else.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah, what has it been like for you personally, Dakota? What does anxiety look like in your life?
Yeah, so like I was saying, I hadn't had dealt with it until I had went to Washington State University. It was really like an event that happened there that kind of sparked it. And I just always had like this, I'm an overthinker. I think too much. One thing about me is I'm my hardest critic, and I always will be. It's a positive, but it's a negative in a lot of ways, especially with anxiety, because I'll be in my head a lot. I'll say things that really honestly don't need to be said, but I'm sitting there overthinking things. And Di knew me has known me since my senior year, so 2014. At that time, I'm very outgoing. I'll be the one center in the room. I'll meet every person, shake hands, make everyone laugh, this and that, be very comfortable. Once I had introduced to that, it changed my whole lifestyle. I was frustrated because I'm scared to do things like this. That's why off air, I made the joke of shock therapy. This is honestly one of those things. It's, like she said, like fear, this and that, but it's also like that emotion that's like changed me personally, which has been hard for me to navigate. And so, like he said, Daniel said, I don't take medicine. I'm the same way. It's one of those, I'd rather just fight it, figure it out, things like that. I dealt with depression too. So that's one of those things where I don't like how medicine makes me feel. So I'm on that mental battle of like communicating with people, trying to figure out who I am as a person now, especially spiritually too. So.
You want to tackle this one too, Hannah?
Sure. Well, I had a rather abusive childhood, and I went to school and became a teacher. I got a master's in education, and I had a very secluded childhood. So getting out and meeting other people, I mean, just my nature, I was just terrified of everything. Didn't matter what it was. And though I went to school and tried to learn about it, again, knowing is not the same as doing, and that it's meant to be icky. It's meant to feel bad if it's doing its job. But when you have anxiety as a disorder, then it's constant and you don't know what the source of the problem is. And so I think it was probably, I'm a lot older than I look, it's probably like the first 40-something years of my life that I just dealt with that. And I think it showed up mostly in my relationships. I couldn't stand to be alone, that kind of thing. And so I'd get into one relationship after another and cause all kinds of problems, and searching for anything to quell it. And usually other people would. And that included like moving to India and living there and just all kinds of things like that. So going to lots of extremes to try try to pacify the feeling and make it go away, which just usually made it worse.
And it's unique to see that you went to the extremes, because I know people will go to the complete opposite. Like for myself, I'll be in my room. I'm not trying to face it.
Yeah.
I'll hide from the problem. So that's kind of.
But that's an extreme for you.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you all mentioned an extreme.
Yeah.
Which I don't think I knew that about anxiety. So I'm already learning as I listen and watch. So who struggles with anxiety? I mean, as a therapist, there must be a huge uptick in people who are coming and asking for help. But has it always been around? Is it more prevalent now? Like, talk to me about what your circles that you're in, each of you, and tell me what that looks like.
We actually can't research-wise say whether it's more prevalent. I had to look this up recently for some training I did. We can't say whether it's more prevalent because definitions have changed, the amount of being able to check people has changed. But what we definitely can say is what we're treating has really, really amped up. And I'm not sure I have a client or have come in contact with a client in probably years that doesn't have anxiety. And in a disordered way, in America, there's over 40 million diagnosed with anxiety. And that's just the ones we know. Yeah.
How about you, Daniel?
My sense is that it's incredibly common. And I'd say normal. I'd say it's a normative thing. If you have a concern that you're struggling with anxiety, like that's okay. And chances are the person right next to you does too. And the amazing thing is that if you can kind of talk to each other about it, it does something really special in that space. And if we can then invite God into that space with us, like we're churching, God, ourselves, and another, all talking about it, like really transformative stuff happens in that space. You know, I can speaking just for myself, in the space of anxiety, what I find is that I have a trusting God problem. And it shows up in the minutia, and like, I won't know what's going on. Once I open that door, I don't actually know I did it. I just know that things don't feel right, and I have to fix it. And I'm like trying to reach back into time and change the thing that just happened by affecting the next conversation. Because if I can talk to you the right way, you'll talk to that person, this will happen, and then that thing with Di won't have happened. And it's total insanity, and I don't even know it. And then a moment will come where I realize it's like, oh, like somewhere along the line, I quit trusting God with outcomes again. And that's okay. That's A-okay. And then I reach out to a friend, and I let them know, and we move forward.
Before you answer, Dakota, I hear hope in what you're saying, Daniel, because we're going to talk in a minute or two about some practical things that we or anyone listening or here could implement that might help. But I hear hope in what you're saying, that you have been able to catch yourself and talk yourself through it and some of those practical things. So I'm excited to hear more about that.
Yeah, very much.
Young professionals, I really do think majority, maybe everyone deals with it, just in a different severity. I think with young professionals, I feel like it's very difficult because of how we don't open up. We're in this generation with social media. We see people's lives that are, you know, for example, for me, like we have social media. I'm at the point in my life where I'm trying to basically become a young professional, find my career, find how to support myself in an area that we live in that's very expensive. So this is like that little start of the anxiety that builds up. So especially for young adults, we're trying to figure it out. And it, you know, all the little things add up to it, you know, how if you have successful people around us that, you know, that can help us, but also, you know, for some that creates anxiety. It's like, okay, if they can do it, I should be able to do it. Why am I not doing it? So young adults, that social media world makes it difficult because we're so independent in ways, and we don't open up. And that's very kind of what Daniel's saying, is having that, being comfortable to open up, to talk to people, to tell you're in pain, to, you know, you're dealing with this. You know, you don't have to have a full conversation, but having someone just, hey, I'm struggling. And even that itself helps people. So I think in that, our demographic, that social media, just we're trying to find ourselves, but we don't want to talk to people.
I have a lot of questions I would love to ask about the demographic you represent, which is our young adults who are just coming into the workforce, as you said, and just looking for their career. I will refrain from peppering you with all of them, But I will ask you, and I know this is very subjective and there's no science behind it, but do you feel like anxiety is much more prevalent for your generation, which would be you're at the low end of the millennials or the top end of Gen Z? Do you feel like that is something that my generation just has no idea?
Yes. Yes. I think it's in a different way. I don't know, it was hard for my parents to, when I would come home from school, they just thought I was sick or something was going on, but they just didn't understand fully why I'm in my room. You know what I mean? I come home from college, I'm in my room, there's a reason I'm in my room. You know, they didn't really know what I went through in school. You know, was just new in my faith, and I went there and had my first day there. I ended up drinking, but I drank so much where it made me sick. I got a stomach ulcer, and at that point, it's that with the anxiety that adds an extra sickness to it. But it's just, I don't know. I think at this point I really do, because of all the external factors compared to when it was. Yeah. My stepdad is very old school. I worked 3 jobs. There's no social media. This is just how it goes. Very old school. My mom's very professional. No tattoos, no piercings. This is how it goes. It's just how life is. But things change so much now with technology, with just how the world is with like financing, having to be successful. It's just like, especially in our minds, that we have that in our mind. It's like, we need to be successful, especially for like me and the people that I'm around. It's that constant fight of like, dang, I'm struggling. I don't have my own place to live. I'm struggling to pay rent where I'm at. Like, I can't even pay groceries. So it's that whole buildup, which I know all demographics has dealt with that. I just think that social media aspect of it has just made it greater than it has been.
I agree. I see Hannah over there shaking her head yes.
and I also want to add the global nature of the world now. Oh, I don't know, 50, 75, 100 years ago, who did you have to compare yourself to? And the comparison fallacy and FOMO and all that stuff is more than our brain can even process now.
Yeah, sorry.
My kids tell me that the pressure, and they don't know because they didn't live when I was their age, but they are positive, and I tend to agree that the pressure they experience is multiplied many times over from what I experience. So the pressure is great. Would you agree with that?
1000%. And it's like they have this app called like TikTok, right? Most of the time it's people
You
dancing.
may have heard of it.
Yeah, you may have heard of it, okay? It's a bunch of people on there doing, showing their talents, things like that, dancing. But it's the aspect of coming from where I am, where I kind of picked the traditional route. Graduated high school, I went to college. I'm out, I'm searching for jobs, I'm doing right, I'm staying out of trouble. But then I hop on my phone and a 13-year-old has just made $5 million off of making some dances. Right. To me, that's like, that causes you push pressure on me. It's like, I should be able to do that. I should not even say make the dance, but why am I struggling doing the things that were taught to me the right way? You get to college, you get a job.
Right.
That's not the truest thing.
Yeah.
Right.
It's real.
We'll teach you everything you know, you'll be ready, but they don't really tell you it's about who you know, not what you know, really. Just coming from my point of view in that aspect.
So those are the additional pressures that get added on, which must feel at some point like they're crushing you. So now, because lots of people experience that feeling, so we're talking now in that range of extreme anxiety, maybe even to debilitating anxiety. If we take the blanket understanding that we all struggle with some sort of anxiety and it can be used for good, but there's when you cross over the line, I'm not saying it in your technical terms, Hannah, but when you cross over the line into some form of a debilitating anxiety, which all of you have experienced, talk to me about what practical things help you. So Daniel, why don't you go first?
Well, so the first thing is to realize it's happening, which is a miracle when I realize it's happening. Because what's happening in me is I'm just trying to fix the problem. And the second I fix one, I still feel the same way. I just create a new problem. And I can just jump from one crisis to the next, to the next, to the next. But once I realize it, the most important thing in the world is that I reach out and I connect with another human being. And I tell them I'm in a panic state, I'm in a spin state, or I'm experiencing anxiety, or I'm really upset and I don't know why. I think it can be really easy, kind of touching back to what Dakota was saying about social media and this pressure, this idea of How many people are there to compare ourselves to? I don't need to be compared to anybody but me, and I just need to be able to be honest. And letting go of that and giving myself permission to be a little weird or a little awkward, guess what? It's incredibly freeing because I am a little weird and a little awkward, and that's okay. When I'm living my life being who I am, I do well, even with anxiety. And like Di was mentioned a moment ago, like she said, like, it sounds like there's some hope. I don't want to project this onto other people, but in my experience, like wrestling with and dealing with the reality that anxiety is a real part of my life. There is not a story where it's not a part of my life. There is a story where I avoid that, and there's a story where I deal with that. The story where I deal with it is good. God touched, good. My belief, for those of you that struggle with anxiety, is that in that space of asking God and a friend into that with you, that you can find that it's good for you too.
You got the professional outlook.
Don't follow the professional.
Let me go. Let me go. I think for me, like Daniel had mentioned, I believe, for me, it's at times I feel like it is a lack of faith, a lack of trust in God in certain situations. There's this verse that I've been saying constantly in my head. It's Hebrews 13:8. It's basically God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So dealing with like the things that I went before I got saved, after I got saved, after that, it's been I constantly remind myself, I'll be okay. He's got my bag no matter what. And that's been helping me a lot. I know a lot of people can't get to that point, and even though I don't know my issue, why I'm having this panic or anxiety, just telling myself, I'm gonna be fine. I'm gonna be fine. Like people around me, I have people to talk to. I know people that care. I have people that reach out. It's just that constant reminder that he's there. He's shown that he's been there. So it's just that constant reminder for me. Working out too, that helps.
100%.
That's good and practical.
Exercise.
Yes.
I don't know if I need to say anything because y'all covered it. You have to be aware. And I like what you said too, because there's a technique we use called acting as if. So you decide, what is it that, say, I want to have confidence. So what would a confident person be thinking, saying, and doing in this situation? And we don't like that sometimes because it feels like we're faking, but let's call it practice. It's not. And the truth is, you are the beautiful, confident, loving person internally, but it's kind of covered over with that anxiety sometimes. And so you're just practicing who you actually are amidst all of that. And I can't help but say just a little bit of my practical neuroscience that I mentioned to you before. Something that I think is so, so important for people to understand is that we have this little thing in the back of our head called the amygdala. I call it SAM. SAM stands for search, alert, and mobilize. It's there to move your body out of the way. So if you're playing baseball or something and a ball is coming at you, you don't have to say, gee, prefrontal cortex, what should I do right now? Like you're gone, right? And so there's that part of your brain that will move you. Well, here's the thing. In certain kinds of anxiety, it goes through a part of your brain that sends the information right there, and it doesn't go to the part where you think in a high level. And so anybody here ever did something where they're like, why did I just do that, right? Or, okay, so the important thing to understand with that is that we have very limited response abilities. Not responsibilities, but the ability to respond when that happens. And so part of our brain will try to tell us a story about that. And so using the present moment as kind of a place to bring yourself back to, say, is this story true that I'm telling myself right now? Does it reflect what God has told me? And I like what you said, and if you at your age know this, you're eons ahead, because it's important to say, okay, well, God says I'm a conqueror, he says he loves me, whatever. Am I living like that's true? And what would that look like, right? As far as some little techniques when you're overblown with some of the emotion, because sometimes it can get too much, a couple of ones that I really love is changing your what if, flipping it to an if what. So when your brain is in that, well, what if they see me? Or what if I don't get that job? Or what if I screw up when I'm standing up here talking to people? If I don't get the job, what I will do is this. And give yourself a plan, because your brain wants to know what's coming next. Your brain is an anticipation engine, and you are not your brain. You are more than that. You're bigger than that. So you don't have to let your brain run your show. So I like that, flipping the what ifs to if whats. And then another one I like is something called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which is kind of a sensory deal where you just look around and you list 5 things you see, 4 things you feel, 3 things you hear, 2 things you smell, 1 thing you taste. And what it just does is sort of shut down that noise that you're saying to yourself and get you in kind of a neutral place. It's really good for sleep when you can't shut your brain down and stuff like that. So if you have anxiety as a long-term thing and you don't want to take medication, some of these techniques can kind of bring that cortisol and adrenaline and all that icky feeling in your body down so that you can manage it and then meditate on the word. See, Jesus is smart. Like they had that years and years ago, right? Thousands of years ago, that's what we're meant to do.
I'm really glad we're recording this so that we can all go back and write down all the things you just said. But let me ask a question from this is something I really want to know, but I know I'm not the only one that wants to know this. So these are great tools for someone I know or anyone I know who's struggling with anxiety, is having an actual anxiety episode or is over the top panicking, for them to implement. But what do I do as the support person in their life? Is that if I offer a what if or an if what, am I petty? Talk to me about what my job is, because I want to help, and I tend to be very reality based, so really, what's going to happen here? But I don't want to come off like, really, your anxiety is ridiculous, because I want to validate it, but I also don't want to amp it up and play into it. I don't know what to do.
Well, I think you have to talk to the person ahead of time. You have to be invited to teach someone. And so I would sit down with them and say, here's what I'm noticing. Maybe code words or some things that I can do to bring your attention to it at the time when it's happening can be really helpful. It is very difficult when you're feeling anxiety to have somebody who doesn't understand it come and tell you to calm down or just get over it. That usually makes it worse because you want to withdraw and not be seen, and it's so important to be seen. And so I would have a little conversation with them ahead of time and say, in that moment, how can I help you? And maybe offer some truth, some accuracy in that moment if you can.
Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I think being a person that someone can talk to and having that arranged ahead of time of how does this relationship work? What are my permissions in your life? Do I have permission to kind of cross onto your side of the street and move things around? Is that what you want? And then when the moment comes, you have a clear boundary on that. And that can be really helpful because to be able to listen is valuable. To pray, more so. But to be able to speak up with some critical thought that may not be occurring to the other person in that moment, that's helpful, really helpful. So like if you're my friend, and I'm in an anxiety event and you can see it, and I trust you enough to talk to you, I gotta tell you, you having the courage to be willing to take a few risks on my behalf can really help me. For example, I have to stop feeding it. If I just keep feeding it, if my anxiety is happening in a social space, and I just wanna keep going back and fixing the thing that's happening here, I probably need to not reach out and ask another question. And as my friend, you can maybe help me do that. Whereas by nature, I'm going to keep going back again and again and not understanding why it's not working, because that's what happens when I'm in an anxiety event.
Last question before I wrap it up. And this came in, actually we asked outside of this room for questions, and this question came in. Is distracting yourself from anxiety a healthy technique? Like trying to just change the channel in your brain or move to something else, or do you have to actually address it and do something with it? I don't know. Is that a really hard question? Sorry.
No. Actually, so I teach something called DBT, and we have something in there called the two rules of distress management. And rule number 1, if there's a problem you can solve it. So if you're upset with your person and you really could go and solve the problem, don't distract out of that. Rule number 2, if you can't solve it, survive it and don't make it worse. And one way you do that is that you can distract if you're so upset that you can't think clearly about doing something. Only till you can get to the point where you can. So distracting as a tool to solve an anxiety problem makes it worse.
She's good.
I just want to quickly add into that last question. I agree. You find someone you can talk to, especially for millennial or the younger professionals. Find someone that you can allow correct you. I don't know everything, so I have people in the church that when I open up and they see what my complaint, what my anxiety issue is at that point, if they can pinpoint it, give me some correction. You're complaining about not getting this job. Okay, what are you doing? What are the steps? Let me help you. Just from my perspective in that demographic, we don't know everything. So
it's like Hannah said, when you have that conversation ahead of time with somebody and you say, hey, you have permission to ask me these hard questions or to ground me if I'm flying out there somewhere in anxiety. Good. Well, first of all, thank you, each of you, for sharing your experience and your expertise. Thank you guys for joining us. I know that this conversation can and should continue. And so I'm going to leave you all with one final question. Those of you in the room, I'm going to encourage you to have this conversation with someone near you. Those of you who are going to listen to this later, I encourage you to find someone to have this conversation with. We call this the next question. And so the next question is going to be, if you struggle with anxiety, do you have someone that you could talk to about it, that you have invited in, who has permission, who you can be honest with? Those are common things that were said here on this panel. And if not, how are you going to find that person? Finding that person is really important. So can you think of somebody in your life that maybe could be? So who can you talk to about anxiety? Who can you talk to? That's the next question. Thank you guys for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
And thanks for listening.